Now there's some other things to consider here. Up to now, we have worked with global variables only. And what I mean is, all the variables we have used have been declared in the header of our program. And in our case here, as well as being declared in the header, we've also declared them in the include. So going back down to our form, this will tell you that your form can access what are considered global variables. It can access all the variables. So in this case, we are changing the contents of a global variable or a global internal table, itab02. Now what we haven't discussed is the use of variables defined exclusively within our subroutine, which we would class as a local variable. Local variables can only be accessed within the subroutine where they are declared. Once the system finishes processing code within our subroutine and control passes back to the main body of our program, all the local variables can no longer be referenced. Now, some of the benefits of using local variables are that the variables only have to be available in the subroutine, so there's no point making them available outside. So by declaring them inside the subroutine, we save a little bit on memory usage. And because we are trying to modularize our code by declaring local variables and using local variables, we don't have to worry about the variables being declared in the main body of our program. You know, everything is self-contained. Now, I mentioned a little while ago that subroutines have an interface, and we can use local variables in our subroutine to be used in the interface, and we can give them any name we want. And at the same time, the calling program, so in our case the main body, that can use its own variables as well. It doesn't have to use the same name that we defined in the subroutine. So to declare a variable in our subroutine, there's no magic. You already know the code. All we do is make sure we are inside the subroutine and we just start coding. So we would use the data statement. Let's say employee, if I can spell. Oh, let's give it a different name. Z-employee. Z-E-M-P-L. How's that? And we can say it is like our Z-employees table, the field surname. So here we have just defined a local data variable within the form, and it can only be referenced from the code we place inside the form, which we don't have much of just yet. Now I mentioned we can declare variables to be used in the interface of our form. And when we do that, we're telling the system we're going to transfer data throughout the subroutine data interface. So let's have a look at the code and see how we do it. So what I'm going to do is go back to the top of our program. Well, scroll down. And we'll do another perform statement. So I'm going to say perform itab o2 fill, let's say again. But this time I'm going to say using Z field 1 and Z field 2. So what are these Z fields? Well, they can be anything at all. So let's say up here we have another data statement. We will say Z field 1. We'll say like Z employees. Let's say surname this time. And Z field 2, we can say like full name. So I just do a syntax check, make sure we got no errors. And we do. Let's have a look. Oh, of course. I haven't created the subroutine yet. Let me just comment this out. There we go. Okay, everything's good. So we'll put the code back in. And now we will use forward navigation to create this brand new form. It says, do you want to create it? We'll choose yes. And we'll say pop it in our main program. And we're down at the bottom. Now, add a few spaces. Now notice how this differs. Because we declared this perform statement and added the using and added two fields, our form was generated and included two fields that will be used in the interface. So this is one of the benefits of using forward navigation. You don't have to think too hard about the actual syntax you need to use to create a form, because double clicking using forward navigation, it creates a syntax for you. But what I would say is rename the fields so that they are easier to understand. They represent what you're passing through. So in our case, I'm going to say Z surname. And I'm going to rename this to Z forename. Now something else to notice is the form here is declaring two fields that will be used in the interface of the form. But notice there's no data type. Now they were taken from our perform statement, so the fields used in our form are declared exactly the same as those declared in the main body of the program. When our program is executed and processing reaches the perform statement, the contents of Z field 1 and Z field 2 will be copied in to our PZ surname and PZ forename within the form. Now one thing to bear in mind is if we change the contents of our local fields that have been declared in the form header, so these two, you will also be changing the values of the fields that were passed into the form by our perform statement. So let's add a line of code to see how all this works, and then we'll debug the code. So in this form, I'm going to say PZ surname. No, actually, what I'll do is write PZ surname on the new line. And I'll do the same for forename. Then I'm going to change the contents of surname and that's it. Now higher up in our program, where we have the perform statement, I'm just going to make sure we're going to pass in some values. So I will say Z field 1 is equal to Andrews. And Z field 2 is equal to Susan. So when the perform statement is executed, these values will be passed through to the form subroutine. So let's check our code. We have a missing full stop, of course we do. Okay, and we'll activate. And then I will add a breakpoint to the first perform. And then let's test it out. So the first statement, it says perform iTab02 fill. So let's step into this. You can see it's jumped down to the form. Let's have a look at iTab02. It's initial at the moment. So it executes the statement, fills the table, we reach the end form, and now processing passes back to the top of our program. We fill Z field 1 and Z field 2. and then we perform our second subroutine, itab02 fill again, and we're passing in these two fields. So let's move these up a little bit. And here I'm going to bring in ZP name and Z4 name. So here you can see the values of Z field 1 and Z field 2 were passed into the interface. Or sorry, were used in the interface so that the local variables P underscore Z surname and P underscore Z forename were filled with those interface values. We then have two write statements, which we can see on the screen. And then we're going to update Z surname, or P underscore Z surname. And see what happened? Because the field is used in the interface, our global variable, Z field 1, was also updated at the same time. So this is a really important thing to keep in mind when you're using fields in the interface and you're using the using addition. Any fields used in this declaration will be changed as well. So let's zoom through, well, we'll step through. So once that form is filled, then it continues with the rest of the program, which I can't remember really what it does. I guess it's doing a loop. Let me stick a breakpoint here so we can zoom through this. Zoom through that. Simple describe. And then the program crashed. Let's have a look. And yeah, there we go. There's the problem. We have this clear statement, so the internal tables are actually empty at the time we try to insert a record. So here we should have some logic to say if line count, let's add that. If line count is greater than 0, perform our insert statement. And actually, let's include all this in this if statement. Looks good. So now when we get down to the insert statement, right now it shouldn't do anything because we have this clear. But if this was taken out, then the if statement would be true. Let's run it again. I'll press the F6 key to execute this first form fill. F6 again. Stick a breakpoint there. So we go through that loop. Cleared out the work area and internal table. So now this loop should actually not execute. There we go. Describe line count. If it's greater than 0, perform the insert. If not, then the program's finished. So a little detour into a debugging my error. But all examples are good examples. But that's it. That gives you a good flavor of how to use subroutines within your program. Now we're not done with subroutines just yet. We're going to look at some of the other additions and how we can pass more than just fields through the interface.